Rain slicked the village square into a mirror of mud and accusation, and the sound of it seemed louder than church bells. She stood at the center, hands folded over the round promise of her belly, a thin blue wool gown clinging where it should have floated, eyes lowered not in guilt but in the weary habit of survival. He arrived with the crowd, boots heavy, voice heavier, already certain of his righteousness. Words were flung like stones before his hand followed, and the shove that sent her down felt less violent than the gasp that rose when she landed, knees sinking, palms smeared brown. Mud stained the hem, the skin, the story others would tell before she could stand. She did not cry at first. She counted her breaths, counted the way her children stirred, as if to remind her that falling was not the end. The villagers leaned in, hungry and careful at once, murmuring of disgrace and suspicion, of a wife too quiet, a pregnancy too full. He spoke of shame as if it were a debt she had incurred alone, as if vows were a ledger he could balance with anger. She lifted her eyes then, and something in them startled him, calm, luminous, unprovable. It was the look of someone who had been elsewhere in dreams, a gaze that did not belong to this place. From the edge of the square, a carriage waited, its dark lacquer glistening like wet obsidian. The man within watched without blinking, his gloved hand tightening around a silver ring marked with a wolf's head. He had crossed half a kingdom on a rumor and a pendant remembered too late, and now the rumor breathed and knelt in the mud. He did not step forward. Kings learned restraint before mercy. He learned it again. Her husband turned away, already done with the spectacle he had made, and the relief of that abandonment cut deeper than the fall. She pushed herself upright with dignity borrowed from somewhere older than memory. An old woman offered a shawl, pressing it into her trembling fingers with a whisper that felt like a benediction. "Child," she said, "your eyes are not of this village." The words lodged like a seed. At home, the door slammed with a finality that left echoes. He rummaged through her few things, anger seeking proof. A small wooden box was hurled into the yard, its latch bursting, contents scattering. She knelt again, slower now, gathering the fragments of her life. A chain surfaced from the mire, its pendant dulled by earth, a wolf crest etched so finely it seemed to breathe. She wiped it with her sleeve, and a warmth bloomed beneath her ribs, unbidden, undeniable. The carriage door opened a fraction. The man inside recognized the crest at the same instant she did not, recognition striking like thunder in the chest. He remembered a woman with the same eyes, taken in winter, hidden for safety, lost to lies that calcified into history. He whispered her name into rain, a name she had never been given. Days passed with the careful cruelty of routine. She was watched and weighed by glances, corrected for walking too slowly, for resting too often, for carrying life as if it were a fault. Yet something had shifted. The pendant rested warm, her dreams sharpened, her spine remembered how to straighten. When she closed her eyes, she felt not hunted but accompanied, a presence pacing the edges of her fear, patient as stone. The village women debated her fate in kitchens and doorways, voices lowered yet eager. Some called her foolish, others dangerous, a few unaccountably tender. She heard enough to understand that her husband's certainty had given them permission. Permission to stare, to judge, to decide what she deserved. She answered with silence, which grew heavier and more deliberate, a shield she learned to lift without shaking. That night she dreamed of moonlit forests and steady paws circling her, guardians rather than hunters. Morning brought a letter in careful script and a parcel wrapped against the weather. Inside lay shoes soft as forgiveness, a cloak lined with fur, and a single sentence that offered no signature and demanded no thanks. "For the sake of the children you carry." She pressed the paper to her lips, not knowing why tears came then, not knowing why she believed. The village prepared for a neighboring estate's engagement feast, and her husband forbade her attendance with the cold authority of a man certain of his power. She prepared anyway, quietly, the way women learn to prepare for storms. The cloak fit as if measured, the shoes did not bruise. She fastened the pendant beneath her bodice, close to the life that answered it. She paused at the threshold, breathing through the ache, aware that every step now echoed. The air felt charged, as if a door had opened somewhere unseen. She did not turn back. Whatever waited ahead had already found her. Her children stirred, answering the summons with certainty. At the feast, chandeliers flared like captured stars, and whispers braided themselves into garlands. He kept his distance, his absence a public wound. She stood alone until the room tilted and a steady hand caught her elbow. The stranger's voice was formal, measured, asking after her comfort as if it mattered. She smelled rain and iron and something like pine. When she looked up, the eyes that met hers were mirrors across a gulf of blood and years. He released her at once, as if burned, bowing with a courtesy that bent the air. Her husband saw the exchange and his face hardened into resolve. Outside, the rain returned, washing the stones clean. From the shadows, the man who had waited all his life stepped forward at last, and the wolf on his ring seemed to bare its teeth. She felt the pendant warm against her heart and knew, without knowing why, that nothing would ever be small again. She woke before dawn to the ache of movement beneath her ribs, the children insisting upon their presence with a rhythm that felt like insistence rather than pain. The cloak lay folded on the chair, smelling faintly of pine and rain, and the letter waited where she had set it, as if it might change its mind if touched again. Outside, the village breathed in low murmurs, already awake to speculation. She rose slowly, steadying herself, and the pendant answered with a pulse of warmth that surprised her into stillness. At breakfast, her husband spoke little, which was its own kind of sentence. He watched her with a sharpened patience, measuring each step, each breath, as if her body were an argument he intended to win. When she reached for the bread, he withdrew the plate an inch, a gesture small enough to deny yet cruel enough to register. She did not protest. Silence had become a language she wielded with care, choosing where to place its weight. She left the house without asking permission, the door closing with a sound that felt irrevocable. The path to the estate ran through hedges heavy with dew, and the morning light broke them into shards of silver. As she walked, she felt watched, not with hunger but with attention, the sense of a presence pacing her stride. The memory of the stranger's voice returned to her, formal, measured, asking after her comfort as if it mattered. It had mattered. The realization unsettled her more than his gaze had, for it suggested a world where concern was not a trap. At the gates, she hesitated, aware of mud still caked beneath her hem, of the way eyes would catalogue her. A servant stepped forward, bowed, and spoke her name with an ease that startled her. The sound of it seemed to open something in her chest, a recognition without proof. Inside, chandeliers bloomed like constellations, and the air carried the perfume of cut flowers and restrained delight. She stood straight, the cloak's weight settling her shoulders, and entered. Her husband arrived late, making a point of it, greeting others with an exaggerated ease that excluded her by design. He did not offer his arm. Whispers traced her path, circling the curve of her belly, the line of her jaw, the steadiness of her walk. She listened without listening, counting heartbeats, aware of the children's answering calm. A woman brushed past, murmuring an apology too practiced to be sincere. Another smiled with curiosity that felt almost kind. The room shifted, minute by minute, as if aligning to a different gravity. When the stranger appeared again, it was as if the light had decided to rest upon him. He did not claim her attention with spectacle. He waited until she looked, until their eyes met, and then he inclined his head in a greeting that carried history she could not place. He spoke of the weather, of the road, of ordinary things, yet every word felt deliberate, chosen to reassure rather than impress. She answered with the courtesy she had been taught, and something unspoken threaded between them, taut and luminous. Her husband watched from across the room, misreading restraint as intimacy, patience as conspiracy. His jaw tightened, his smile thinned. When a tremor passed through her and she steadied herself against a table, it was the stranger who noticed first. He stepped close enough to offer his arm without touching, an invitation she could accept or refuse. She accepted. The contact was brief, respectful, and it steadied more than her balance. It steadied her sense of what was possible. Later, as music swelled and receded, a servant pressed a glass of water into her hand and whispered that she might sit if she wished. She sat. The stranger remained nearby, speaking to others with an ease that suggested authority without display. When he glanced her way, his eyes softened, and she felt a pressure behind her eyes she did not indulge. The pendant warmed again, insistent, and she tucked it closer to her skin, unsettled by its certainty. Outside, rain began to fall, gentle at first, then more sure of itself. The guests gathered near the windows, admiring the spectacle, the way the gardens darkened into mirror and shadow. Her husband approached her then, his voice low, his words edged. He spoke of impropriety, of gratitude owed, of rumors that would not be kind. She listened, and when she answered, her voice was calm. She spoke of respect, of the children, of dignity. The words seemed to bruise him. He took her elbow, too tight, and she felt the room inhale. The stranger moved, not quickly, but with purpose. His voice cut through the rain's percussion, a single sentence that stopped the music of the room. He asked that the lady be released. The request carried no threat, yet it landed as one. Her husband laughed, brittle, and tightened his grip. The stranger did not repeat himself. He met her eyes instead, and she saw resolve there, ancient and patient. They stepped into the courtyard where rain traced the stone into dark rivers. Her husband spoke louder now, performance overtaking conviction. He accused, he named, he insisted upon his right. She felt the old pull toward the ground and resisted it, standing firm despite the ache in her back, despite the children's restless turning. The stranger stood between them, not touching, simply present, and the space he occupied changed the air. Enough, he said, and the word was not loud, but it traveled. The courtyard stilled. Her husband faltered, then scoffed, reaching again. The stranger's hand closed around his wrist, not in anger but in refusal. The contact was brief, final. A murmur rippled outward, and with it came recognition, as subtle as a shift in tide. Faces changed. Backs straightened. Someone knelt, not knowing why. She remembered her mother's hands, always busy, always gentle, teaching her to mend seams and silence alike, warning her that kindness could be mistaken for weakness. She remembered lullabies without words, sung to calm storms she did not yet understand, and the way strangers sometimes stared as if she were a portrait misplaced. Those memories braided now with the present, tightening her resolve. She was not fragile because she bent, she endured because she chose when to rise, and the choice had come. In that choice, fear loosened its grip, making room for a courage that felt inherited rather than learned suddenly. She felt it then, the truth rising without language. The pendant burned against her skin, no longer gentle. The stranger's gaze held hers, and in it she saw not desire but belonging, a claim that did not erase her but named her. The rain softened, the stones gleamed, and her husband's certainty cracked into something like fear. The stranger leaned close enough that only she could hear him. He spoke her mother's name. The sound broke the last wall she had built, and tears came, quiet and unstoppable. Around them, the world held its breath. Whatever she had been before this moment fell away, and what remained stood trembling yet unbowed, ready to be spoken into truth. The rain thinned to a fine mist, as though the night itself had grown quiet to listen. She stood at the center of the courtyard, breath shallow, one hand braced beneath her belly, the other hanging at her side where her fingers trembled despite her resolve. Her husband's grip had fallen away, yet his presence still pressed upon her like a shadow that refused to leave. He looked smaller now, not in stature but in certainty, as if the world had shifted and left him standing on ground that no longer recognized his claim. The stranger did not raise his voice again. He did not need to. Authority lived in the way he stood, in the stillness of him, in the careful restraint that suggested power long practiced and rarely questioned. He turned slightly toward her, offering his shoulder without command, and she found herself stepping closer, drawn by instinct rather than reason. The children stirred, responding to the nearness of him, and she felt a fierce, sudden protectiveness flare within her, sharp as flame. Her husband laughed, though the sound fractured midway. He spoke of rights and vows, of propriety and shame, repeating words that had once held weight. They fell now like coins struck false. The stranger listened without interruption, his gaze steady, until the tirade exhausted itself. Then he spoke, quietly, naming the harm for what it was. He did not accuse. He stated. The distinction mattered. It stripped the moment of spectacle and left only truth, bare and unavoidable. She remembered the mud on her hands, the sting in her knees, the way the village had leaned in to witness her fall. She remembered how she had risen without help, how dignity had felt heavier than grief. Those memories aligned now with the present, clicking into place like pieces long kept apart. The stranger's presence did not erase her suffering, it gave it context. It told her that what had been done to her was not small, and therefore she need not be either. Guards appeared at the gate, summoned not by shouted orders but by a signal so subtle she almost missed it. Their arrival shifted the courtyard again, and with it the crowd's understanding. Heads bowed. Whispers turned cautious. Her husband looked from face to face, searching for allegiance, finding none. His mouth opened, closed. He stepped back, and for the first time she saw fear plainly on him, unadorned by anger. The stranger removed his glove, revealing the ring she had glimpsed before, its wolf crest catching what little light remained. He did not brandish it. He merely let it be seen. A ripple passed through the onlookers, recognition moving faster than speech. Someone knelt fully now, then another. The sound of stone against stone echoed, and with it came a hush that felt like reverence. She swayed, overwhelmed, and the stranger steadied her with a hand light enough to be a promise rather than a claim. He spoke her name again, and then he spoke another, one she had never worn yet somehow carried. Daughter. The word landed with both tenderness and weight, settling into her bones as if it had always belonged there. He told her of her mother, of love hidden for safety, of choices made in shadow to spare a child a crown's danger. Each sentence was measured, offered not to dazzle but to ground. She listened, tears tracking silently, feeling grief and belonging twist together until they were indistinguishable. Her husband dropped to his knees then, not in reverence but in desperation. He begged forgiveness with the same mouth that had accused, the same hands that had pushed. The spectacle sickened her. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Only a profound distance, as if the person she had been when his approval mattered had already stepped away. When she spoke, her voice was steady. She asked for peace. She asked to be left untouched. She asked for her children's safety. Nothing more. The stranger inclined his head, accepting her terms as law. He gestured once, and the guards moved, not roughly, not cruelly. Her husband was led away, his pleas fading into the night, swallowed by the damp air. The villagers remained kneeling, unsure if they might rise. The stranger told them they could stand. They obeyed, awkward and chastened, as if waking from a dream that had revealed too much. A carriage waited beyond the gate, its lanterns glowing softly. The stranger offered her his arm, and this time she took it without hesitation. Each step felt deliberate, a crossing rather than an escape. She paused once, looking back at the courtyard, at the stones that had borne witness to her humiliation and now her truth. She did not curse them. She did not bless them. She simply turned away. Inside the carriage, warmth gathered, scented with leather and clean wool. The stranger sat opposite her, giving her space, though his presence filled it. He spoke of dawn, of travel, of rest. He did not yet speak of crowns or courts. She was grateful. The children settled, as if soothed by the rhythm of the wheels, and she placed both hands over her belly, breathing more easily than she had in months. As the carriage rolled forward, she felt the final tether to her former life loosen. Ahead lay a palace she had never seen, a future written in symbols she was only beginning to understand. Behind her, the village receded into darkness, carrying its whispers with it. She closed her eyes briefly, and in that moment of quiet, the wolf crest warmed once more, answering something distant and inevitable. When she opened them again, the road stretched long and gleaming before her, and she knew the journey had truly begun. Dawn arrived quietly, pale light sliding across the palace stones as if unsure it belonged there. She stood at the tall window of the chamber prepared for her, one hand resting beneath her belly, the other braced against the cool glass. The room was vast yet restrained, rich without excess, its silence respectful rather than empty. Servants had come and gone like careful ghosts, bowing, speaking softly, never asking questions she was not ready to answer. Still, the weight of the place pressed upon her, reminding her that dignity could feel as heavy as shame when it arrived without warning. The Alpha King waited in the adjoining hall, giving her time she had not known she needed. When he entered, he did so without ceremony, setting aside the authority he wore like a second skin. He spoke of her mother again, not as a legend but as a woman who laughed, who loved fiercely, who chose obscurity over danger for her child. Each detail stitched something closed within her, even as it opened new ache. She listened, measuring the truth of him not by his crown but by the way grief still shadowed his eyes. He offered her a seat, then sat across from her, mirroring rather than presiding. Between them lay the pendant, cleaned now, its wolf crest catching the morning. He did not touch it. He told her what it meant, not in grand declarations but in lineage and law, in responsibility passed down like a vow. She felt the children respond, a ripple of movement that made the truth undeniable. Royal sons, heirs not by ambition but by blood. The words frightened her less than she had expected. What frightened her was how quickly they made sense. Days followed with deliberate rhythm. She was taught the palace's language of pauses and glances, of when to speak and when silence carried more power. She learned the names of rooms and histories etched into walls, the expectations that came with each corridor. Yet beneath it all, she remained herself, asking after servants' families, thanking cooks, noticing who flinched and who stood too straight. The Alpha King observed without correcting her. He seemed to understand that bending her into shape would break what made her worthy. News traveled faster than carriages. Word of her arrival stirred courts and villages alike, carried by rumor and resentment. Some whispered that she was an impostor, a convenient miracle. Others clung to the romance of a lost daughter returned. The Alpha King did not shield her from these murmurs entirely. He let her hear enough to choose how she would answer them. She chose composure. She chose patience. Still, at night, fear crept close, whispering of what crowns demanded and what they destroyed. Her husband's name surfaced like a bruise pressed too often. He petitioned, begged audience, wrote letters thick with regret and entitlement. The Alpha King showed her each request, placing the decision where it belonged. She read them once, then asked that they be returned unanswered. It was not mercy she offered him, nor vengeance, but irrelevance. The choice steadied her more than any decree could have. One evening, a council gathered, faces lined with curiosity and calculation. She stood beside the Alpha King, not behind him. Questions were asked, some veiled, some sharp. She answered what she could and did not fill silence where uncertainty lived. When one lord spoke of legitimacy with a smile too thin, she met his gaze and spoke of her children's future, of stability bought not by cruelty but by care. The room shifted. Respect, she learned, often arrived quietly. Later, alone again, she pressed her palm to her belly and spoke softly to the life within. She promised safety without softness, strength without bitterness. The promise felt binding, heavier than any oath she had known. Outside, torches flared as night settled, their light flickering like watchful eyes. She wondered what waited beyond the palace walls, what storms would test the fragile order she was learning to inhabit. The Alpha King joined her on the balcony, offering a shawl she accepted. He spoke then of succession, of threats not yet named, of those who would test her claim by testing her resolve. He did not frighten her deliberately. He prepared her. She listened, feeling the truth of it settle. This life would not spare her. It would require her to stand again and again. Below them, the gates opened to admit a late rider, mud-splattered, urgent. A message was carried up, sealed in black wax. The Alpha King read it, his expression tightening, then looked to her. Beyond the hills, unrest stirred, fueled by those who preferred the old cruelties to new truths. He asked if she was ready. She felt the children shift, steady and strong, and answered without hesitation. She was not ready to be unbroken, but she was ready to endure. The gates opened at sunrise, not with ceremony but with resolve, iron groaning as if aware it was yielding to history. She stood beside the Alpha King, her spine straight despite the weight of the hours behind her, her hands folded calmly over the life she carried. Beyond the threshold, riders waited, banners damp with mist, faces hardened by expectation. The unrest had not crept closer, it had arrived, bold enough to announce itself. She felt fear, yes, but it no longer ruled her. It moved within her like weather, acknowledged and endured. They rode together, not in haste but with purpose, the road unfolding through villages that had already heard her name. Some knelt as they passed, some stared, some turned away, unwilling to believe in mercy shaped like a woman they had once dismissed. She met every gaze with the same steady composure, refusing to bargain for acceptance. The Alpha King watched her from the corner of his eye, pride tempered by caution. He had learned, as all rulers did, that love could be weaponized, and he would not let hers be turned against her. At the edge of the disputed lands, they dismounted. The air smelled of wet earth and iron, of men who had waited too long to be heard. Leaders stepped forward, voices sharpened by grievance, accusing the crown of softness, of abandoning old orders that kept power cleanly cruel. They spoke of her as an inconvenience, a disruption, a wound made dangerous by prophecy. She listened, her face unreadable, and when they finished, she spoke. She did not argue lineage. She did not threaten force. She spoke of hunger she had known, of silence mistaken for consent, of strength that grew from care rather than fear. The words unsettled them more than any blade. One man lunged, rage finally outweighing sense. Steel flashed, guards moved, but she lifted her hand. The Alpha King froze the field with a single look, and she stepped forward, placing herself between threat and consequence. Her voice carried, calm and unafraid, naming the violence for what it was, desperation afraid of change. The man faltered, weapon lowering, confronted not by punishment but by clarity. Around them, resolve wavered. It was easier to fight an enemy than to face a truth. The clash never came. It dissolved instead, like fog burned away by steady light. Agreements were reached not through surrender but through exhaustion, through the realization that the old ways demanded too much blood for too little order. As the crowd dispersed, she sagged, the effort catching up at last. The Alpha King steadied her, murmuring praise he rarely voiced. She accepted it without shrinking, having learned that humility did not require erasure. They returned to the palace under a sky clearing into blue. News traveled ahead of them, reshaped by each retelling, yet the core remained, the lost daughter had stood and the kingdom had listened. In the days that followed, preparations were made quietly. There would be no spectacle, no coronation staged to dazzle descent into silence. There would be acknowledgement, law amended, protections codified. She participated in every decision, asking questions that cut to consequence, refusing comforts that insulated her from reality. Her husband appeared once more at the gates, thinner now, stripped of certainty. He begged again, louder, invoking love he had never practiced. She met him in the courtyard where he had once watched her fall. The symmetry did not escape her. She did not raise her voice. She told him that love did not survive contempt, that vows broken by cruelty could not be repaired by regret. She wished him a life away from her children and closed the door with finality that did not tremble. The night before her sons were due, storms gathered, thunder pacing the horizon like a challenge. She labored through the hours with a courage born of long endurance, gripping the Alpha King's hand with surprising strength. He stayed, not as ruler but as father, fear plain and unashamed. When the first cry came, fierce and indignant, he laughed through tears he did not hide. When the second followed, steadier, curious, the sound filled the chamber with something like hope. At dawn, she held them both, exhausted and radiant, the future warm and weighty in her arms. The Alpha King knelt, not to the crown but to the woman who had reshaped it. Outside, bells rang, not ordered but spontaneous, rising from streets that had learned a new language overnight. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the sound wash over her, then opened them to meet the world that awaited her children. The kingdom woke changed, not because a throne had shifted, but because dignity had been defended without cruelty. She stepped into the light with her sons, aware that challenges would come, that peace required vigilance. Yet as she crossed the threshold, she felt no doubt. From the mud to the crown, she had carried herself with the same quiet strength, and now the road ahead, uncertain and gleaming, belonged to her at last.